The call came at 2:47 p.m. Marcus checked his phone in the executive washroom at Pinnacle Capital. Watching the notification bloom on his screen like a warning light, he almost ignored. His daughter's school. Not an emergency, the message said. But Emma's teacher needed to speak with him. Urgently. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. That familiar father's panic. The kind that makes time bend. He'd built an empire on reading signals, on spotting weakness in boardrooms before his competitors even knew they were bleeding. But when it came to his 9-year-old daughter, he was still just a man terrified of failing her. He left the office without explanation, something he never did. The elevator ride down felt like drowning in air. The thing about being a black single father in a world obsessed with power is that people see the title before they see the man. Marcus Reeves was 38, self-made, ruthless in business, and invisible in the way that mattered most. He raised Emma alone after her mother left, not dramatically, not with fanfare, just a slow fade that taught him how silence could be louder than any goodbye. Emma was 9 now, brilliant and careful in a way children shouldn't have to be. She'd learned early that her father was busy, important, always one phone call away from leaving. She'd learned not to ask for much. He'd paid for the best schools, the best tutors, the best everything money could buy. Yet, as he drove toward Riverside Academy, his Audi cutting through traffic like a blade, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd been missing something the whole time. Something essential. Something that couldn't be purchased. The school sat behind wrought iron gates, all manicured lawns and limestone facades. Oak trees older than the building itself stretched toward a cloudless sky. Marcus had chosen it specifically because Emma deserved to be surrounded by excellence, by children whose parents understood the weight of legacy. He'd believed that surrounding her with privilege would somehow protect her from the loneliness he'd known growing up, the sting of being different, of not fitting, of standing outside while others belonged. He was wrong. Her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, met him in the hallway outside Emma's classroom. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the posture of someone who'd spent a lifetime delivering difficult truths. She held a folder against her chest like armor. "Thank you for coming so quickly," Mrs. Patterson said, gesturing toward her office. "Please, sit." The office smelled like pencil shavings and laminated papers. There were drawings on the walls, children's art, colorful and hopeful. None of them were Emma's. "Emma's been struggling," Mrs. Patterson began carefully. "Not academically. She's brilliant, as you know. Her math scores are exceptional. Her writing is mature for her age. But socially, Mr. Reeves, there's been a shift." Marcus felt the first tremor of dread. What kind of shift? "She's withdrawn. The other children, they've been unkind. Not overtly cruel, but there's a pattern. She eats lunch alone. She stopped volunteering in class discussions. Last week I asked her to read her essay aloud. It was beautiful, actually, about her weekend with you, and when she stood up, the children started whispering. She sat back down without reading it." Marcus's jaw tightened. What were they saying? Mrs. Patterson hesitated, choosing her words with the care of someone walking through a minefield. "There's a girl in the class, Madison. Her father is a venture capitalist, very prominent in the community. Madison has been making comments about Emma's family, about single parents, about how girls need mothers, how it's unusual for a father to work so much. She's been—" Mrs. Patterson paused. "She's been suggesting that Emma's situation is somehow deficient." The word hung in the air between them like poison. "And the other children?" Marcus asked quietly. "They listen to Madison. Children do, you know. They follow the powerful ones, the ones who seem certain. Madison seems very certain about a lot of things." Marcus felt something calcify in his heart. He'd worked so hard to give Emma security, had sacrificed countless nights and weekends to build an empire that would ensure she'd never want for anything. And it had become the very thing that isolated her. His success had become her shame. "I'll talk to her," he said. "Please do," Mrs. Patterson replied, and there was genuine warmth in her voice. Emma is extraordinary, Mr. Reeves. But extraordinary can feel like a curse when you're 9 years old and you just want to belong. He picked Emma up early. She came to the car quiet and small, her uniform pressed perfectly, her backpack too large for her shoulders. Her eyes were carefully fixed on the space between them, on the crease in her skirt, on anything but his face. She didn't ask why he was there. The drive home took 30 minutes. Neither of them spoke. Marcus kept glancing at his daughter, at the way she held herself, rigid, braced, as if preparing for impact. When had she learned to be so small, so careful? The penthouse was pristine, designed by someone who charged 6 figures and had no children of her own. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, marble countertops cold as a tomb, furniture selected for aesthetics rather than comfort. It was a monument to Marcus's success, a physical manifestation of everything he'd built, and it had never felt less like home. Emma kicked off her shoes and moved toward her room without speaking. "Emma, wait!" Marcus called. She stopped, her small frame silhouetted against the wall, waiting. Just waiting, as if she'd learned that waiting was the safest thing she could do. "Mrs. Patterson told me about Madison," he said carefully. "About what's been happening at school." Emma's shoulders rose and fell in a breath that seemed to cost her something. "It doesn't matter." "It does matter. You matter. Talk to me." She turned slowly, and Marcus saw it then, not anger, but something older and deeper. Resignation. As if she'd already decided the world wasn't a place where she belonged, and had begun making peace with that fact. "They think we're weird," Emma said flatly, her voice hollow in a way that broke something in him. "Madison said her dad told her that single dads who work all the time are selfish, that real families have mothers and fathers. She said you spend your whole life making money because you don't actually care about me. You just want to show off." The words landed like fists. Each one struck true because they carried, somewhere deep inside them, a grain of truth that Marcus couldn't deny. He sank onto the edge of the glass coffee table, the one he'd paid $3,000 for and that no one was supposed to sit on. "That's not true," he said, but his voice was hollow. "But you do spend all your time at work," Emma replied, not unkindly. "Just factually, like a court presenting evidence, like a child who'd learned to observe her parents' absence so carefully that she could measure it down to the hour. You're not home for dinner, you miss my recitals. Last month you said you'd come to my soccer game and then you called to say you had a meeting." Marcus opened his mouth, closed it. Because she was right, wasn't she? Absolutely, devastatingly right. He'd been so focused on being enough that he'd forgotten to actually be present. He'd confused provision with presence, success with significance. "You're right," he said finally, and the admission felt like a wound opening. "I've been spending too much time at work, but not because I don't care about you. Because I was scared." Emma's expression shifted slightly. She tilted her head, waiting for more, waiting to understand. "Scared of what?" she asked. Marcus took a breath. "That if I wasn't the best, the most successful, the most powerful in the room, then I wouldn't be able to protect you. That if I was just ordinary, you'd grow up thinking I wasn't good enough, that you'd be ashamed of me." Emma was quiet for a long moment. She sat down beside him on the forbidden table, her small body close enough to touch but not quite touching. "I don't care if you're rich, Daddy," she said finally, her voice small and certain. "I just care if you're here." Marcus felt something break open inside his chest. He pulled his daughter close, and for the first time in months she let him. She buried her face in his shoulder, and her small body trembled with the release of all the tears she'd been holding back. That night, Marcus made a decision. He would take Emma out of Riverside Academy, not because he was running, but because he was done pretending that proving his worth to the world would ever fill the space between them. He sat in his office until 3 a.m, his laptop glowing in the darkness, and began making calls. The next morning, he told his assistant to clear his schedule. All of it. He'd return in 2 weeks, but in the meantime, he was going to be a father. Not the father who provided everything. The father who showed up. It was during that first week, while Marcus and Emma were baking cookies in the kitchen, burning them actually, because he'd never learned to follow recipes and Emma was laughing so hard she could barely breathe, that Rosa knocked. Rosa had been their housekeeper for 3 years, a woman in her early 60s with silver streaking her dark hair and hands that moved with quiet efficiency through the spaces of their lives. Her hands told stories, calluses from years of work, age spots like constellations, nails cut short and practical. Marcus barely saw her. She came in the mornings at 8 and left by noon, and they'd developed the kind of professional distance that allowed them both to pretend the other didn't exist. She was the background to his life, the invisible keeper of his home. But Rosa knocked on the door of his office that evening, which she'd never done before. She held a tablet in her hands, and her expression was grave in a way that made the air itself seem heavier. "Sir, I need to show you something," she said quietly, "and I need you to promise me you'll listen with an open mind before you react." Something in her voice, the steadiness of it, the weight of responsibility she carried, made Marcus set down his phone. Emma was asleep upstairs. The penthouse was quiet in that way that only occurred after midnight, when the city's noise faded and you were left alone with your thoughts. "What is it?" he asked. Rosa moved to the window and closed the curtains, even though no one could possibly see in from this height. Then she opened the tablet and pulled up a file marked with dates going back 6 months, photographs, security camera footage from inside the penthouse, timestamps, evidence meticulously organized. "I clean during the day when you're at the office," Rosa said quietly, "and I notice things. It's my job to notice. I noticed that Emma's room, it was being changed. New decorations in a style that wasn't hers. New clothes she didn't like, clothes that Emma would hide in the back of her closet. New toys, expensive ones, the kind Emma never asked for, and she would take them out when she thought no one was watching, look at them like they were evidence of something, then put them away again." Marcus felt unease crawl up his spine like cold fingers. "What are you talking about?" "Your sister," Rosa said, and her voice was steady but carrying the weight of what she'd witnessed. "She comes here when you're at work. She has a key. I don't know how she got it, but she comes in through the garage. She's been trying to influence Emma, telling her things about you, about how you're not enough, how a girl needs a woman in her life, how if Emma wants a real family, she should want that too." The world tilted. Marcus gripped the edge of his desk. "That's not possible," he said, and his voice sounded strange to his own ears. "Catherine doesn't even speak to us. She's been estranged for 3 years, Rosa finished. "Yes, but she's been here, sir, many times. Emma asked me not to tell you because she was scared you'd be angry with her for keeping the secret. She was trying to protect you, even as her aunt was trying to poison her against you." Marcus felt the ground open beneath him. His sister, his only blood family besides Emma, had been systematically working to undermine him, to convince his daughter that he was failing her. And he'd been so focused on his work, so consumed with proving his worth to the world that he hadn't even noticed. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Because I've watched you," Rosa said, meeting his eyes with a directness that was almost unsettling. "For 3 years, I've watched you come home exhausted, and watched Emma waiting by the window, and watched your heart breaking in ways you didn't even know about. And I know you love that girl more than anything in this world. But love isn't always enough when there are people who want to weaponize your child against you. Your sister, she's trying to convince Emma that you don't deserve her, that you're selfish and cold, and that she should want to live with her instead. That's insane. Catherine hates children. She always has. She was the one who said, years ago, that she'd never have kids because they were too much responsibility. She doesn't care about the child," Rosa interrupted, and her voice carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. "She cares about what the child represents, your success, your life, your happiness. She wants to tear it down because she's spent years tearing herself down, and she can't stand to watch you be happy. Misery loves company, sir. It really does." Marcus sank into his chair. In that moment, he understood something with terrible clarity. He'd been so busy building an empire to prove his worth that he'd completely missed the war being waged for his daughter's soul. While he was in boardrooms, while he was making deals, his sister had been slowly, methodically poisoning the only relationship that truly mattered. "What do I do?" he asked. Rosa was quiet for a long moment. She set the tablet down gently and moved to the window, looking out at the city lights below. Millions of lives being lived, millions of stories unfolding in the darkness. "You come home," she said finally. "Truly home. Not physically. You're here. But you make Emma feel like she matters more than anything else in this world. You show her every single day that she is enough, that you are enough, that this life, this small and imperfect life you've built together, it's worth more than all the money in the world. And Catherine? You protect your daughter from her," Rosa said, not with anger, with clarity. "You tell Emma the truth, age-appropriately, about why her aunt has been visiting and what she's been trying to do. You let Emma know that it's not her fault, and it's not because Emma isn't worthy of love. It's because Catherine is broken in a way that has nothing to do with you." The next morning, Marcus sat with Emma before school and told her everything. He held her small hand in his and told her about her aunt's visits, about the things Catherine had said, about the truth underneath it all. He didn't shield her from the reality, but he held her hand while he did it. He explained that sometimes people who are hurting try to make other people hurt too, that Catherine had never forgiven him for being happy, for building a life, for having Emma, that none of it was Emma's fault. "Do you still love her?" Emma asked, her voice small but serious. "Yes," Marcus said, because it was true. "But love sometimes means distance. It means saying no to people who want to hurt us. It means protecting the people we love from the people who would destroy them." Emma nodded, processing this in that serious way she had, the way she was learning to process the complicated world. Then she said, "I'm glad you came home early. I'm glad you're staying." That afternoon, Marcus called Catherine. His hands were steady as he dialed, but his heart was thundering. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and false. "Marcus, darling, to what do I—" "You're no longer welcome in my home," he said quietly. "You no longer have access to Emma. If you want a relationship with my daughter, it will happen with my full knowledge and supervision. Nothing more, nothing less. I understand that you're in pain, but I will not allow you to weaponize my child." She tried to gaslight him, tried to convince him that she'd only been visiting because she loved Emma, tried to suggest that he was being paranoid and controlling, that he was the one being unreasonable, the one isolating his daughter. But Marcus had spent years reading people, and he heard in her silence, in the small hesitations, the truth. She'd been caught, and now she was calculating how to recover, how to spin this, how to make herself the victim. He hung up before she could finish. The weeks that followed were quiet and ordinary in the way that now felt sacred. Marcus and Emma fell into a rhythm that became the best part of his day. Breakfast together, where he learned that Emma loved scrambled eggs with too much butter, and that she had opinions about everything from climate change to the merits of different breakfast cereals. Drop-off at her new school, a smaller, kinder place where she made friends quickly, where she didn't have to be small. Dinner together, cooked badly, and eaten with laughter. Bedtime stories, because he'd missed those too, and because Emma still wanted him to read to her, even though she was old enough to read herself. He still worked, but differently. Purpose-driven rather than achievement-obsessed. He hired a team to handle the day-to-day operations. He built systems so he could leave by 5 o'clock every single day. He stopped accepting meetings that required him to miss Emma's life. One evening, Rosa brought Emma's favorite soup to dinner, a recipe her grandmother had made in Mexico years ago before she came to this country. It was warm and complex, flavored with cilantro and lime and something indefinable that tasted like home. Marcus asked her to eat with them, not because he pitied her, but because he'd come to understand that she'd been the only person paying attention to the truth. She'd been the one who saw what was happening and had the courage to speak, to risk her employment, to do the right thing even when it would have been easier to stay silent. "Thank you," he said simply as they finished eating, "for protecting my daughter, for being the person I wasn't." Rosa smiled, and in that smile was the understanding of a woman who'd spent her life being invisible while saving people's lives. "You're a good father," she said. "You just needed to remember that being good isn't about how much you can provide. It's about how present you can be." Emma, listening from across the table, nodded solemnly. "Daddy's the best now," she announced with the certainty of a child who'd finally gotten what she'd always wanted. "Because he actually listens when I talk." That night, after Emma was asleep, Marcus stood at the window of his penthouse and looked out at the city lights. Millions of windows, millions of lives. He thought about power and success, about all the things he'd sacrificed and all the things he'd almost lost. He thought about how close he'd come to not noticing, how his sister had almost successfully driven a wedge between him and his daughter, how it had taken a quiet woman with silver in her hair to shake him awake. He thought about the life he'd been building, the one that looked impressive from the outside but was hollow at its center. The next month, Marcus did something unexpected. He sold the penthouse, not because he was running from success, but because he was moving toward it, the kind of success that couldn't be measured in square footage or market value. He bought a smaller home in a neighborhood where people actually knew each other, where Emma could ride her bike on quiet streets without him worrying about traffic, where there was room for a garden and a life that didn't require performing excellence at every moment. Rosa came with them, not as a housekeeper, but as part of the family, because Marcus had finally learned the difference between employing someone and honoring someone, between seeing and being blind. She had her own room, her own life within their home, and more importantly, she had a family that valued her not for what she could do, but for who she was. The day they moved, Emma planted flowers with Rosa in the front garden. The flowers were crooked and half would probably die, but she was laughing in a way that money could never buy. That kind of laugh that comes from genuine joy, from belonging, from being seen and valued by the people who mattered most. Marcus watched them from the porch, dirt under their fingernails, determination on their faces, and he understood, finally, what his sister had never grasped, that real power wasn't the ability to tear others down. It was the ability to lift people up, to see them, to honor them, to come home early, not because you have to, but because there's nowhere else in the world you'd rather be. Epilogue. A year later, Madison's father, the venture capitalist with his polished smile and his certainty, saw Marcus at a charity event. He approached with that smooth confidence of someone who'd never been challenged in his life, who'd never had to question his own narrative. "Reeves, isn't it?" he said, extending his hand. "I've been following your work, heard you stepped back from the day-to-day operations. Bold move. Some might say reckless." Marcus shook his hand firmly. He was wearing a suit, but it fit differently now. Less like armor, more like clothing. "Not bold," he said, meeting the man's eyes. "Honest. Turns out the most important investment I ever made wasn't in money. It was in my daughter." The man laughed uncomfortably, as if Marcus had made a joke he didn't understand. But behind them, Emma and Rosa were talking with her teacher, and Emma was animated in a way that no amount of privilege had ever made her before. She was genuinely, completely, unapologetically happy. She was telling a story with her whole body, her hands moving, her face bright with joy. She belonged to herself now, not to anyone else's expectations. And that, Marcus realized, was the only metric that had ever really mattered. The people who matter most aren't always the ones who appear in your boardroom. Sometimes they're the ones who notice things in the quiet hours. Sometimes they're the people we've learned not to see. But when the truth matters most, when your life hangs in the balance, they're the only ones worth listening to. Sometimes the greatest warning comes not as a shout, but as a quiet knock on your door. And if you're lucky enough to hear it, if you're brave enough to act on it, your entire life can change. That's what happened when a black single dad came home early, and what he found waiting wasn't loss. It was everything.